In the cold forests and storm-lashed shores of the distant north, small pieces of hardened resin carried influence that reached far beyond anything visible in the immediate settlement. Amber gathered from the Baltic coast traveled hundreds of kilometers through river valleys, mountain passes, and unfamiliar territories before it could be worked in the markets of the Mediterranean. This movement never relied on coin or written contract. It depended entirely on chains of personal recognition, remembered obligations, and the slow coordination of many hands across vast distances. The exchange did not resolve when the amber left the shore. Its value remained in motion, held across time in fragile chains of memory and trust. Before coins, before banks, belief ruled the world. For thousands of years before coinage, amber moved along what later became known as the amber routes. These were overlapping networks of paths, river systems, and portages that connected the Baltic shores to the Adriatic and beyond. The trade is visible in the archaeological record from at least the early Bronze Age, around 1600 to 1500 BCE, and continued well into Roman times. Baltic amber, known as the gold of the north, reached Mycenaean Greece, Etruscan Italy, and sites as far as Syria and Egypt. Chemical tests confirm its northern origin even in distant royal tombs such as Qutna. The distance itself mattered. Amber's value was not created only where it was gathered, but through the many stages required to move it. Amber formed when ancient tree resin hardened over millions of years. After storms, coastal communities collected the irregular lumps washed ashore and sometimes shaped them into beads, pendants, or amulets. Its power came from several qualities at once: warm golden translucence, strange electrical charge when rubbed, lightweight, durability, and the belief that it offered protection. In many societies it carried ritual significance, yet it also functioned as a portable store of value that could survive long journeys and pass between generations without decay. The material endured, but the promises around it still had to be maintained. The system worked through successive relays rather than single long journeys. A piece might leave a Baltic village in return for salt or bronze, then move south along the Vistula and Danube corridors through many different communities. At one crossing, it might be handed to a river trader who knew the next settlement but not the final buyer. At another, it might be held until a familiar intermediary returned with goods owed from an earlier passage. Each transfer depended on remembered agreements and living reputation. Trust had to cross cultural boundaries. It only worked as long as each transfer was remembered. A single failure to deliver what was owed could damage the entire chain for years. The network functioned only while every link continued to honor what had been promised. Without that continued recognition, value could not reliably cross the next river or mountain pass. Every segment therefore carried an invisible burden of enforcement and recall. The system allowed value to travel farther than it could ever be directly verified. A piece of amber could move forward while the obligation attached to it remained unfinished behind it. This was not trade in the later monetary sense. Value was not settled at the moment of exchange. It remained distributed across people, places, and time. The object traveled, but the relationship still had to be maintained. In this way, amber exposed both the reach and the weakness of pre-coinage exchange. It allowed value to move across great distances, but only by stretching trust far beyond the community where it began. This trade did more than move amber. It created enduring corridors for tin, salt, furs, wine, glass, and metalwork to flow in both directions. Exchange points appeared at river crossings and mountain passes. Communities positioned along these routes gained reliable access to materials otherwise unavailable locally. Those who controlled even short segments, a guarded ford, a reliable portage, or a trusted meeting place, often strengthened their social position and gained influence over neighboring groups. Control did not require possession of the whole route. It could emerge from command over a narrow passage where movement repeatedly depended on permission, safety, or recognition. The frequent discovery of amber in elite burials across wide regions of Europe shows how this material could mark distinction far from its source, and how control of its movement could become a source of lasting status. Yet the system carried growing strain. Distance imposed long delays. Goods passed through many hands, and each handover required verification by memory alone. Theft, seasonal flooding, conflict, or simple miscommunication could interrupt the flow. A delayed return, a lost bundle, or a broken promise did not simply end the transaction. The obligation remained. When routes became dangerous or one group withheld goods, pressure moved backward along the entire network. Memory proved imperfect over distance and time. Reputation could erode. Coordination across hundreds of kilometers demanded constant effort and carried permanent risk of fracture. The longer the chain, the heavier the burden of maintaining every connection. Consider the human reality within this system. A man walking the Baltic shore after a gale understood that the amber in his hands was not yet fully his in the social sense. Its real worth would only appear months later when return goods arrived. Perhaps better tools, stronger alliances, or reserves against future scarcity. Farther south, another waited beside a river, with bundles still unclaimed, knowing the debt was not settled until balance was restored. Time did not release either party. The obligation endured, testing whether the chain of trust would hold even when seasons changed, witnesses dispersed, and memories faded. The amber routes also revealed their own limits of scale. Within smaller regions, repeated face-to-face interaction and shared memory could sustain reciprocity. Across hundreds of kilometers and multiple cultural zones, verification grew harder. Not every piece could be reliably traced to its origin. Variation made certainty difficult. Differences in color, clarity, size, and workmanship complicated assessment. As demand in the Mediterranean grew during periods of prosperity, pressure increased on northern collection areas and on the reliability of every intermediary. The system functioned because participants kept goods moving and obligations alive, but it could not expand indefinitely without introducing new forms of standardization, verification, or enforcement that reduced dependence on extended personal memory. Amber's long journey therefore demonstrated both the impressive reach and the built-in fragility of exchange before coinage. It connected distant ecological zones and cultural worlds through a single natural substance, yet every step of its movement rested on trust that required constant renewal, memory that demanded active maintenance, and physical transport that left value exposed to interruption and loss. The networks carried real economic and social consequence across space and time, but they operated under conditions that became harder to sustain as distance, demand, and complexity increased. In the next episode, we will examine cowries, a transregional shell currency. Through their spread, we will see how more uniform and countable natural objects began to ease the coordination burdens and verification problems that the amber routes had to carry across such vast distances.